Alicia Evans, a pregnant black activist, mysteriously dies after a routine traffic stop with 2 officers. Was it an accident or a targeted cover-up? As Detective Maria and best friend Linda dig deeper, dark secrets unravel. Why was Alicia really killed? Discover the truth behind her story. What do you think happened? The sun sets slowly over the small southern town of Belhaven, casting long shadows across the old community center parking lot. Inside, Alicia Evans, a 28-year-old black woman with a passion for justice, stands at the front of the room, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. The room is filled with a small but determined group of people. Fellow activists, community members, and local leaders, most of whom are people of color. Alicia's voice rings out, clear and passionate, as she speaks about the importance of police accountability. Too many of our brothers and sisters have suffered under the weight of systemic injustice, she declares. We can't afford to stay silent. We need change, and we need it now. Alicia's eyes scan the room, seeing nods of agreement from familiar faces. Linda Carter, her best friend and fellow activist, is right in the front row, smiling and giving her a thumbs up. Linda has always been her biggest supporter, and together they've organized protests, community meetings, and social media campaigns to bring attention to the town's police practices. But Alicia also notices the nervous looks from some of the older attendees, their eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting trouble. Belhaven has always been a town where racial tensions run high, and Alicia knows her activism has made her a target. Still, she refuses to back down. As the meeting wraps up, Alicia leaves the stage, shaking hands and exchanging hugs with community members. Stay safe out there, she says to a few people as they file out. She's aware of the risks she takes every time she speaks out, especially after dark. Outside, under the dim glow of a street lamp, 2 police officers sit in a patrol car across the street, watching the scene unfold. Officer Brian Miller, a man in his early 40s with a hardened expression, grips the steering wheel tightly. His eyes narrow as he watches Alicia, his jaw set. Next to him sits his partner, Officer Jake Stevens, a younger man, who seems less sure. His fingers tap nervously on the dashboard. "Can you believe this?" Brian mutters, his tone laced with disdain. "She's out here stirring up trouble again. And people listen to her." Jake shifts uncomfortably in his seat. "Yeah, I guess. She's just talking, though. Maybe it'll blow over." Brian scoffs. "Talking, my ass. People like her are the reason we get so much pushback in this town. She's turning them against us." Jake doesn't respond, sensing the intensity in Brian's voice. He knows Brian has a reputation, one that's not entirely clean. The older officer has been accused of roughing up black residents before, but his connections in the department always ensured the complaints were quietly dropped. Jake is new enough to still feel uneasy about it, but he's learned to keep his mouth shut when Brian starts on one of his rants. As Alicia exits the community center and walks toward her car, Brian's eyes follow her every move. He feels the anger building inside him. "One of these days, she's going to push her luck too far," he mutters. "And when she does, she won't get away with it." Jake looks over at his partner, seeing the hard glint in his eyes. He knows when Brian has a target in mind, he rarely lets it go. "What are you thinking, man?" he asks, trying to gauge the extent of his partner's frustration. Brian's lips curl into a thin smile. "I'm thinking it's about time we remind her who's in charge around here." Jake feels a chill run down his spine. He's heard this tone before, usually when Brian is planning to escalate a situation. "Brian, we can't just—" "Relax," Brian interrupts, waving a dismissive hand. "We'll do it by the book. She'll give us a reason, sooner or later." Jake falls silent, not knowing what to say. He glances out the window, watching as Alicia drives off into the night. He has a bad feeling about where this is heading. The roads outside Belhaven are dark and quiet, lit only by the occasional flicker of a street lamp. Alicia's car hums steadily along the winding road as she drives home, her mind still occupied with thoughts from the meeting. She feels a sense of pride but also a familiar tension, a knowledge that speaking out carries risks, especially when the police don't appreciate her message. In the distance, she notices headlights approaching rapidly from behind. Her eyes flick to her rearview mirror. The lights get closer, and soon, the red and blue flashing lights of a police cruiser fill her view. Alicia sighs deeply, her heart rate quickening. She knows what this is, she's experienced harassment before, but she also knows her rights. Pulling over to the side of the road, she reaches for her phone, starting a recording as she's done many times before. Pulled over by the police again, she murmurs into the phone. Let's see what their excuse is this time. The patrol car pulls up behind her, and two figures step out, Officer Brian Miller and Officer Jake Stevens. Brian's flashlight cuts through the darkness as he approaches Alicia's window, his expression hidden behind his stern exterior. Jake lingers a step behind, his face shadowed and eyes downcast. Brian taps on her window with his flashlight. Alicia rolls it down just enough to speak. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" "License and registration," Brian demands, his tone flat and cold. Alicia complies, handing over her documents, but she doesn't stop recording. She knows that if anything happens, this video might be her only evidence. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Alicia asks calmly, keeping her voice level. "Your tail light is out," Brian says, without hesitation. Alicia's eyes narrow. She knows her tail light was fine when she left the community center. She keeps her phone steady, filming him. "I'll get it fixed first thing in the morning, Officer Miller." Brian's eyes flash with annoyance at the use of his name. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he orders. "Why do I need to step out of the car for a broken taillight?" Alicia challenges. "Am I being detained?" Brian's jaw tightens. "Step out of the car now. Failure to comply will result in arrest." Alicia's pulse quickens, but she knows she has to be careful. Slowly, she unbuckles her seatbelt and opens the door, stepping out while keeping her phone raised. She stands her ground, looking directly at the two officers. "I'm recording this for my safety." Brian's smile is thin and mocking. "Go ahead, record all you want." He motions for her to move to the front of her vehicle. Alicia complies, knowing that she has to remain calm and cooperative to avoid any escalation. Jake stands to the side, his hands on his belt. He looks uncomfortable, and Alicia catches his eye for a brief moment. There's something there, hesitation, doubt, but it's fleeting. He quickly looks away. Brian begins to search her vehicle without permission. Alicia protests, "You don't have the right to search my car. I didn't consent to this." Brian ignores her, rifling through her belongings. Alicia's phone continues to capture everything, but she feels the rising tension in her chest. She knows this isn't about a taillight, it's about intimidation. It's about making a statement. As Brian finishes his search and finds nothing, his frustration becomes evident. "Looks like you're clean," he mutters, but his tone is edged with anger. He approaches Alicia, standing close enough that she can feel his breath. "Turn off the phone and put your hands on the hood." Alicia stands her ground. "I'm not turning off my phone. I have the right to record." Brian's expression hardens. "You want to play it that way?" In a swift motion, he grabs for the phone. Alicia instinctively pulls back, clutching it tightly. "Don't touch me," she shouts, trying to keep her balance. But Brian's grip is strong, and he yanks her forward. Alicia loses her footing and stumbles, hitting the ground hard. Her head strikes the pavement with a sickening thud. Pain flashes through her, and her vision blurs as she feels herself slipping into unconsciousness. Jake's eyes widen in shock. "Brian, what the hell?" "Shut up, Jake," Brian barks, his voice a mix of panic and anger. He kneels next to Alicia, checking her pulse. She's unconscious, her body limp, and a small stream of blood trickles from the side of her head. "Damn it, she's out." Jake's breathing becomes shallow. "We need to call an ambulance, man. This is bad." Brian shakes his head, looking around the empty road. "No, we're not calling anyone. Do you know what happens if they find out she was recording us? That she hit her head because of me?" His eyes bore into Jake's, daring him to argue. "We'll lose everything." Jake hesitates, feeling the weight of the decision. "What are we going to do?" "We hide her," Brian says, his voice cold and determined. "No one saw us pull her over. We get rid of her and make it look like she fled." Jake's face pales. "That's insane. We can't just—" "You want to go down for this?" Brian snaps. Because if she wakes up and talks, we're done. It's her or us. His words hang in the air, and for a moment, the only sound is the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. Jake looks at Alicia's lifeless form and back at his partner. Fear grips him, but he knows Brian is right. If they don't act, their careers, and possibly their lives, are over. With a shaky nod, he mutters, "Fine. What's the plan?" Brian doesn't hesitate. He grabs Alicia's legs and motions for Jake to take her shoulders. Together, they lift her into the trunk of their patrol car, the weight of their actions sinking in as the trunk closes with a heavy thud. The phone, still recording, lies shattered on the pavement, its screen flickering before it dies completely. They drive into the night, their destination an abandoned field miles away. Alicia's body remains still in the trunk, a silent witness to the crime unfolding. The patrol car's lights cut through the darkness as the two officers move forward, their decision sealing the fate of both their careers and Alicia's life. The patrol car speeds down a deserted back road, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the heavy silence between Brian and Jake. The night air feels oppressive, and the scent of pine trees fills the car as they head deeper into the countryside. Brian grips the wheel tightly, his knuckles white as he keeps his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Jake sits in the passenger seat, staring blankly at the dashboard, his hands fidgeting in his lap. In the trunk, Alicia's unconscious body lies motionless. Her breathing is shallow, and her head rests at an unnatural angle. The car hits a bump, and Jake flinches, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if he could see through the metal partition separating them from her. "Where are we going, Brian?" Jake finally asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Brian doesn't look at him. There's an old field past the logging site. No one goes there anymore. We'll bury her, and no one will find out. Jake swallows hard, feeling his stomach churn. Brian, this is insane. We can't. Brian's eyes flash with anger. You want to end up in prison, Jake? Because that's where we're headed if we don't handle this right. He pauses, his tone shifting to a menacing calm. Think about it. A pregnant black woman, an activist, known for criticizing us. If anyone finds out we hurt her, we'll be crucified. They'll say we did it on purpose. Jake feels the weight of his words. Brian is right about one thing. Alicia's activism has made her a well-known figure, and her disappearance will cause an uproar. But Jake can't shake the feeling that what they're doing is wrong, that they're crossing a line they can never come back from. Just tell me we'll get away with this, Jake says, more to himself than to Brian. We will, Brian replies, his voice steady. If we're smart. He pulls off the main road, the car bouncing as it travels along a narrow dirt path leading into the woods. The headlights illuminate the twisted branches and tangled undergrowth, casting long shadows that seem to claw at the sides of the car. They arrive at the field, overgrown, forgotten, and shrouded in darkness. Brian kills the engine, and the silence is overwhelming. Jake hesitates as Brian gets out of the car, but after a moment, he follows, stepping out into the cool night air. The two of them move to the trunk, and Brian pops it open. The beam of their flashlights falls on Alicia's limp form, highlighting the blood that has dried at her temple. Grab her legs, Brian orders, his voice devoid of emotion. Jake hesitates. His hands shake as he takes hold of Alicia's ankles, feeling the coldness of her skin. Brian grabs her shoulders, and together they lift her out of the trunk. As they carry her toward the edge of the field, the reality of what they are doing sinks in, and Jake feels bile rise in his throat. He forces himself to swallow it down. They set Alicia's body down on the grass, and Brian retrieves a small spade from the trunk. He begins to dig, working quickly and efficiently. The sound of the spade slicing into the earth fills the air, mixing with the distant call of crickets. Jake watches, his hands trembling. He wants to run, to leave and pretend this is all a nightmare, but he knows there's no turning back. Minutes later, Brian finishes digging a shallow grave. The hole is just deep enough to conceal Alicia's body, but not so deep that it would take too long to cover. Help me, he says, gesturing for Jake to lift Alicia once more. As they lower her into the ground, Jake's hands slip, and Alicia's body lands with a soft thud. He pulls back, his chest heaving as he tries to steady his breathing. We shouldn't be doing this, he mutters, the guilt in his voice palpable. Brian doesn't respond. He starts shoveling dirt over Alicia's body, working methodically until she is completely covered. The mound of earth looks disturbingly fresh against the otherwise undisturbed landscape, and Jake feels his heart pounding in his chest. "We're not done yet," Brian says, walking back to the car. He retrieves Alicia's shattered phone and their body cameras, which he had disabled earlier. He drops the phone on the ground and smashes it with his boot until it's nothing but fragments. "Get rid of the body cams," he instructs Jake. Jake hesitates but eventually complies, smashing the cameras against a rock until their internal memory cards are destroyed. Every piece of evidence that could tie them to the scene is obliterated, but Jake knows the truth will haunt him regardless. "We'll report that she resisted arrest and fled," Brian continues. "We'll say she ran into the woods, and when we went to find her, she was gone." He stares at Jake, his eyes hard. "Stick to the story, and we'll be fine." Jake nods weakly, feeling the full weight of what they've done pressing down on him. "And if they find her?" "They won't," Brian says confidently. "No one comes out here. By the time they do, it'll be too late." They get back into the patrol car, and Brian starts the engine. As they drive away, Jake stares out the window, the darkness of the woods reflecting the growing darkness in his soul. He knows they've crossed a line, and no amount of lies will change what they've done. As they return to town, they fall into silence. The radio crackles with mundane chatter, but it feels distant, almost unreal. They pull into the station, and Brian gives Jake one final look. "Remember, we did what we had to do. Now go home and act like nothing happened." Jake nods but remains silent. He walks to his car, his legs feeling like lead. As he drives home, he fights the urge to turn back, to undo what they've done. But he knows it's too late. They've buried not just Alicia but the truth, and his conscience along with it. The next morning, the sun rises over Belhaven, casting a warm glow over its quiet streets and small houses. But for Alicia's best friend, Linda Carter, there is no sense of peace. She's been trying to reach Alicia since last night. Multiple calls and texts have gone unanswered, and worry gnaws at her. It's unlike Alicia to disappear without saying anything. Linda paces in her living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She dials Alicia's number again, only to be met with silence. Anxiety builds as she considers what could have happened. Alicia's outspoken activism has made her a target before, and she knows that Alicia has faced harassment from the police. But Alicia has always managed to check in, to let her know she's safe. This time feels different. With no other options, Linda decides to call the Belhaven Police Department. She's met with the cool, detached voice of a desk officer. "Belhaven PD, how can I help you?" "Hi, I'm calling to report a missing person. My friend, Alicia Evans. She didn't come home last night, and I haven't been able to reach her." Linda's voice trembles slightly, but she tries to keep her composure. The officer on the other end pauses, and there's a brief silence before he responds. "Ms. Evans? We had an encounter with her last night. She was pulled over by Officers Miller and Stevens." Linda's heart skips a beat. "What happened? Is she okay?" The officer's tone shifts, becoming vague. According to their report, she resisted arrest and fled on foot. The officers attempted to locate her, but she disappeared into the woods. Linda's grip tightens on the phone. That doesn't make any sense. Alicia wouldn't run, especially not when she's pregnant. "I can only tell you what's in the report, ma'am. If she shows up or contacts you, please let us know." The call ends abruptly, leaving Linda standing in her living room, stunned. Something isn't right. Linda knows Alicia. She knows her friend is cautious and careful, especially given her pregnancy. The story the police are telling doesn't add up, and a sense of dread settles over her. She decides to take matters into her own hands. Linda reaches out to other members of the community, particularly those who attended the meeting the previous night. Together, they mobilize, sharing Alicia's picture on social media and organizing a search party. Within hours, a hashtag begins trending online, #FindAlicia. Alicia's story gains traction, and soon, the local news picks up the case. The Belhaven Police Department is quick to respond, issuing a vague statement about the incident. They reiterate that Alicia fled from officers and that they are doing everything in their power to locate her. But Linda isn't convinced. She knows that Alicia's history as a vocal critic of police practices has likely made her a target, and she isn't about to let this go unanswered. She meets with other activists and community leaders to plan protests and press the department for answers. "We know something happened to her," Linda says to the crowd gathered outside the police station. "And we won't rest until we find out the truth." As pressure mounts, Linda's efforts draw the attention of a seasoned detective, Maria Rodriguez. Maria has been with the Belle Haven Police Department for over a decade. As a woman of color herself, she's well aware of the racial tensions in the town and the allegations against certain officers, including Brian Miller. When she's assigned the case, she senses immediately that something isn't right. Maria begins by reviewing the initial police report filed by Brian and Jake. The report is brief and suspiciously vague, lacking crucial details. According to the report, Alicia became agitated, resisted arrest, and fled the scene. But there's no mention of why she was pulled over in the first place, nor is there any clear timeline of events. The body camera footage, which should have provided clarity, is mysteriously missing. Maria decides to visit the area where Alicia supposedly fled. She walks the dirt road, her eyes scanning the woods for any sign of disturbance. It's quiet, too quiet. There are no footprints, no evidence of a struggle, nothing to indicate that Alicia had been there at all. Back at the station, Maria confronts Brian and Jake. "I need to understand what happened that night," she says, her tone professional but firm. "Why was Ms. Evans pulled over?" Brian shrugs, his face a mask of indifference. "Tail light was out. Standard stop. She got defensive, and things escalated." "And the body cam footage?" Maria presses. "Malfunction," Brian says smoothly. "It happens sometimes. Technology isn't perfect." Maria's eyes narrow, but she remains calm. Funny how that always seems to happen when things go wrong. She shifts her attention to Jake, who looks visibly uncomfortable. "And you, Officer Stevens? Anything you'd like to add?" Jake's eyes dart between Maria and Brian. "No, ma'am. Just what's in the report." His voice lacks conviction, and Maria knows he's hiding something. She decides to let it go for now, but makes a mental note to keep an eye on him. Meanwhile, Linda refuses to back down. She begins reaching out to local media, sharing everything she knows about Alicia's activism and the harassment she faced. She paints a picture of a dedicated and brave woman who wouldn't simply run away, especially not when she was 6 months pregnant. As the media attention intensifies, the department faces mounting pressure to solve the case. Under the spotlight, Maria finds herself caught between the expectations of her superiors and her growing suspicion that the officers involved are not telling the full truth. Linda, determined to help Maria's investigation, shares Alicia's social media posts and messages, showing a pattern of targeted harassment by the police. "She documented everything," Linda tells Maria. "She knew they were watching her." Maria sifts through the evidence, finding messages from Alicia about recent run-ins with Brian. The pieces begin to form a pattern. It's clear that Alicia was under surveillance by the officers she had publicly criticized, and Maria suspects that this wasn't just a routine traffic stop, it was intentional. But without solid evidence, her hands are tied. The department is already under scrutiny, and any accusations she makes need to be backed by hard proof. That's when Linda tells Maria about a potential witness, a young black man named Darius who was in the area that night. Darius is hesitant when Maria approaches him. "I don't want no trouble, detective," he says, his eyes shifting nervously. "Cops around here, they don't take kindly to people talking." Maria knows the risk he's taking by speaking out, but she assures him that his testimony could be crucial. "I can protect your identity for now, but I need to know what you saw." Darius takes a deep breath before speaking. "I saw their patrol car. It was late, and they were parked down that dirt road, where no one usually goes. I didn't see the whole thing, but I saw them pulling someone out of a car. A woman. She was fighting back." Maria's heart races. "Did you recognize her?" He nods slowly. "Yeah. I've seen her around. It was Alicia." Darius's account confirms Maria's suspicions, but she knows it's still not enough. She needs physical evidence, something concrete that proves Alicia didn't simply flee, as Brian and Jake claimed. The pressure builds as the department urges her to wrap up the case, but Maria is more determined than ever. With Linda's help, She organizes another search party, this time focusing on the area near the dirt road where Alicia was last seen. The clock is ticking, and Maria knows she's racing against time to find the truth. Detective Maria Rodriguez stands on the edge of the dirt road where Alicia was last seen. The late afternoon sun filters through the thick canopy of trees, casting long shadows over the uneven path. A small search team, comprised of volunteers from the community and a few police officers, combs the area, but Maria knows that if there is any evidence left, it will be difficult to find. The pressure is mounting. The Bellhaven Police Department wants this case closed, and some of Maria's colleagues have started to view her with suspicion, wondering why she's digging so deeply into an incident involving their own. But Maria isn't deterred. She knows that if she doesn't pursue every lead, Alicia's story will be buried along with her. Returning to the station, Maria pores over every detail in the report filed by Brian and Jake. The more she reads, the more inconsistencies she finds. For instance, the timestamps in their logs don't match up with the witness account provided by Darius. The report claims that Alicia fled the scene at a specific time, but Darius's sighting happened almost 30 minutes later. There's also no explanation for why they chose to patrol such a remote area that night, far away from their usual routes. Maria requests access to the dashcam footage from their patrol car, but she's met with resistance from her superiors. The footage isn't available, she's told. Technical difficulties. It's the same excuse she's heard about the body cameras, and it's becoming clear that something is being covered up. Determined to find evidence that hasn't been tampered with, Maria decides to dig into the GPS data of the patrol car. She knows it's risky, she's already been warned to tread carefully, but she's committed to uncovering the truth. She stays late one night, accessing the system herself. She inputs the patrol car's ID and retrieves the data from the night Alicia disappeared. As she studies the map, she finds a discrepancy. The GPS shows the car stopped on the dirt road for over an hour, much longer than the officers had reported. Maria prints the GPS logs and locks them in her desk drawer. This is proof that Brian and Jake lied about the timeline, but she still needs something more, a physical connection that ties the officers directly to Alicia's disappearance. Meanwhile, Linda continues her own efforts to keep Alicia's story alive. She organizes another protest in front of the police station, demanding accountability and transparency. The protest draws a crowd, with supporters holding signs reading, "Justice for Alicia" and "Black Lives Matter." The media covers the event, increasing the pressure on the department to produce results. Linda and Maria meet later that evening at Linda's apartment. The police are stonewalling, Maria admits, her face etched with frustration. "I know they're hiding something, but without concrete proof, my hands are tied." Linda listens, her expression resolute. "I'm not giving up. We need to keep looking. There has to be something out there." That night, Maria and Linda organize a small group of volunteers from the community, people who knew and loved Alicia, to conduct another search. This time, they focus on the remote areas surrounding the dirt road, hoping to find anything the officers might have missed. It's almost dusk when one of the volunteers shouts, "Over here." Maria and Linda rush to the spot, their hearts pounding. The volunteer, a young woman, points to the ground where there are signs of disturbed soil, an uneven patch that stands out against the surrounding grass. Maria kneels down, brushing away the loose dirt. Her breath catches in her throat as she sees a fragment of fabric, partially buried. She recognizes it immediately. It matches the color and pattern of the dress Alicia was wearing on the night she disappeared. With her gloved hands, Maria carefully digs deeper. The ground is loose, indicating someone tried to bury something in a hurry. As she pulls away more dirt, the horrifying truth is revealed. Alicia's body, still and lifeless, lies beneath the shallow grave. Her face is bruised, and there are clear signs of trauma. Linda's gasp pierces the air as she covers her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Maria feels a mix of grief and determination. "Call the medical examiner," she instructs one of the volunteers. "We need to secure this area." She knows that this discovery changes everything. Alicia didn't flee, she was killed, and someone tried to hide her body. Now, Maria has the physical evidence she needs to tie the officers to the crime. Maria, backed by a small team of officers she trusts, arrives at Brian's house early the next morning. Brian opens the door, his expression turning cold as he sees Maria standing there, a warrant in hand. "What's this about?" he asks, feigning ignorance. Alicia Evans was found dead, and we have reason to believe you were involved, Maria says, her voice steady. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and suspected involvement in her death. Brian's mask slips, and a flash of anger crosses his face. This is a mistake. I did my job. Maria steps forward, handcuffs ready. Then you can explain yourself in court. As she cuffs him, she can feel the tension radiating from him, but she remains focused. This is only the beginning. She knows they need to get the truth out of both officers. Jake, who is arrested shortly after, appears more visibly shaken. He doesn't protest as he's taken into custody, and Maria sees the fear in his eyes. She knows he's the weak link, and she plans to use that to her advantage. Back at the station, Maria interrogates Jake. I know what happened out there, Jake, she says, leaning forward. I have evidence that you and Brian were involved. But if you cooperate, if you tell me the truth, it could work in your favor. Jake hesitates, his hands shaking as he rubs them together. I didn't want to do it, he says, his voice cracking. It was Brian. He said we had to cover it up. I was scared. Maria's eyes lock onto his. If you testify against him, if you help us understand exactly what happened, the DA might be able to work with you. But you need to tell the whole truth. Jake takes a deep breath, tears welling up. We pulled her over because Brian was angry. She wouldn't back down, and when she started recording, he lost it. He shoved her and she fell, hit her head. He pauses, his voice breaking. She wasn't moving, and he said we had to hide it. We buried her. Maria nods, her expression grim. That's all I needed to hear. With Jake's confession and the evidence she's gathered, Maria knows they have a solid case against Brian. The department can no longer hide the truth, and the wheels of justice begin to turn. The small courthouse in Belle Haven is packed. Reporters line the steps outside, their cameras and microphones pointed at anyone who enters, while community members gather, holding signs demanding justice for Alicia. The air is charged with tension as the town, and now much of the country, waits for the trial that will determine the fates of officers Brian Miller and Jake Stevens. Detective Maria Rodriguez stands outside the courthouse, taking in the scene. She feels the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, knowing that the evidence she's collected, and the testimony she's secured from Jake, will play a crucial role in the prosecution's case. Linda Carter stands beside her, a symbol of resilience, her eyes focused and determined. Together, they have become the faces of the fight for Alicia's justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere is tense. The prosecutor, a seasoned attorney named Daniel King, lays out the charges against Brian and Jake. He presents a compelling case, highlighting the timeline discrepancies, the missing body camera footage, and the damning GPS data showing that the officer's patrol car was parked at the crime scene much longer than they reported. He also points to the medical examiner's findings, confirming that Alicia's injuries were consistent with an assault and that she was moved post-mortem. Brian, sitting at the defense table with his lawyer, remains stone-faced. His attorney argues that Alicia's death was a tragic accident, claiming that she resisted arrest and fell during the struggle. They attempt to paint Alicia as a volatile individual whose actions led to the unfortunate outcome. They lean heavily on her activism, suggesting that she had a history of agitating the police and implying that she might have been unpredictable under stress. The prosecution, however, is ready. They call Detective Maria Rodriguez to the stand, where she confidently presents her findings. She explains how the GPS data and physical evidence directly contradict the officer's report, and she details how the destruction of body cam footage and Alicia's phone was clearly an attempt to hide their involvement. Her testimony is backed by the medical examiner, who confirms that Alicia's injuries could not have been caused by a simple fall. Next, the prosecutor calls Jake Stevens. The room goes silent as Jake, visibly nervous, takes the stand. He glances briefly at Brian, who gives him a cold, unyielding stare. Jake's hands shake, but he takes a deep breath and begins to speak. It was supposed to be a routine stop, Jake starts, his voice trembling. Brian said she had a broken taillight, but when we pulled her over, I realized there was nothing wrong. He just wanted to intimidate her. Jake recounts the events of that night, his voice gaining strength as he continues. She started recording us, like she always did. Brian didn't like that. He got angry, and when she wouldn't put her phone down, he grabbed her. She pulled back, and he shoved her. That's when she fell and hit her head. The courtroom murmurs as Jake describes the moment Alicia hit the ground. She wasn't moving, and there was blood. I told Brian we needed to call for help, but he said no. He said we'd lose everything if anyone found out. He made me help him move her to the trunk. The prosecutor nods, allowing Jake's words to settle. And what happened next? We drove her to a field outside town, Jake continues, tears in his eyes. We buried her there. He told me to destroy the body cams and her phone. He said if anyone asked, we'd say she ran. The defense lawyer tries to discredit Jake, painting him as an unreliable witness willing to turn on his partner to save himself. But Jake remains firm, detailing how Brian pressured him and how he felt trapped, unable to defy his senior partner. The prosecutor closes Jake's testimony by asking, "Why are you telling the truth now?" Jake looks down, then up at the jury. Because it's the right thing to do. And because Alicia didn't deserve what happened to her. When it's Brian's turn to take the stand, he maintains his innocence. His lawyer tries to frame Jake's testimony as the desperate attempt of a man facing his own punishment, willing to throw his partner under the bus to escape responsibility. Brian insists that Alicia was aggressive and that she fought back when he tried to detain her. "I was following protocol," he claims. "She was resisting arrest, and she fell. It was an accident, but Jake's making it sound like something it wasn't." The defense argues that Jake's cooperation is self-serving, a plea deal meant to shift the blame onto Brian. They also bring forward a few character witnesses, white residents and colleagues, who speak about Brian's long service record, framing him as a dedicated officer who simply got caught in a bad situation. But the prosecution isn't deterred. In their closing arguments, they reiterate that the evidence, combined with Jake's testimony, the GPS data, and the medical examiner's report, paints a clear picture of a deliberate cover-up orchestrated by Brian. The jury deliberates for hours, the town holding its breath as they wait for the outcome. News of the trial has spread beyond Belle Haven, drawing national attention. Protesters and supporters alike stand outside the courthouse, awaiting the decision. When the jury finally returns, the room falls silent. The judge reads the verdict. Brian Miller is found guilty of second-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter due to Alicia's pregnancy, and tampering with evidence. Jake Stevens, in light of his cooperation and testimony, is convicted of lesser charges, manslaughter and evidence tampering, but is granted a reduced sentence as part of his plea deal. Brian's expression remains stoic as the verdict is read, but the tension in his jaw is visible. As he's led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the community members and activists who've gathered outside erupt in a mix of cheers and tears. Justice has been served, but the victory feels bittersweet. Outside, Linda embraces Maria, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she says, her voice choked with emotion. "But it doesn't bring her back." Maria nods, feeling the weight of those words. "No, it doesn't. But it means something. It means her life mattered, and it means there's a chance for change." Linda steps up to a small platform set up for the press. She speaks to the gathered crowd, her voice strong and steady. "Today, we got justice for Alicia. But this isn't just about one case, this is about all of us. It's about making sure no one else has to suffer like she did." Her words resonate, and the crowd cheers. The trial's outcome has become a catalyst for change, sparking statewide calls for police reform and increased oversight. Later, Maria visits Jake in jail. She sees a man who looks older, worn down by guilt. "Why did you come?" he asks, his eyes hollow. Maria meets his gaze. "I wanted to know why you finally decided to tell the truth." Jake sighs, leaning back against the cold metal chair. "I was scared of Brian, but I was more scared of living with what we did. I couldn't keep lying, not when I saw what it was doing to the community. To people like Linda." Maria nods. "You did the right thing, even if it was late." As she leaves, she feels a sense of closure but knows the fight is far from over. Alicia's case may be closed, but the deep-rooted issues within the system remain. For Maria, and for the town of Belle Haven, the work toward justice is just beginning. The town of Belle Haven is forever changed after the trial. The conviction of Brian Miller, the once untouchable officer, sends shockwaves through the police department and the community alike. Jake Stevens, although spared a long sentence for his cooperation, remains a symbol of the consequences of complicity. The impact of Alicia's case extends far beyond the courtroom, prompting real change and a renewed sense of unity among those who fought for justice. Brian Miller's conviction is a turning point, but not everyone sees it as justice served. While some in the community celebrate the outcome, others, particularly those who have long supported the police, claim that Brian was unfairly targeted. In their view, the trial was politically motivated, and they see him as a scapegoat for a system that is under fire. These voices are loud, but they are increasingly drowned out by the growing movement for change that Alicia's story has inspired. The judge sentences Brian to a lengthy prison term for second-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and evidence tampering. Though the sentence brings some sense of closure, the judge's words during sentencing leave an impact. This case reflects the need for our community and our justice system to reckon with the deep-seated issues of accountability and trust. Let this be a step toward healing. Jake, in contrast, receives a reduced sentence, 3 years in prison and a mandatory probation period after his release. His cooperation is acknowledged, but the judge makes it clear that following orders is no excuse for committing a crime. As Jake is led away, he looks toward Maria and Linda, a hint of regret in his eyes. They exchange no words, but the message is clear: justice has been served, but the scars remain. As the verdict reverberates through the town and beyond, protests continue, this time with a renewed focus on systemic change. Activists demand that the Belhaven Police Department implement policies aimed at preventing further abuses of power. The calls include mandatory body camera use, independent oversight of police misconduct investigations, and the establishment of a civilian review board. Linda, now a prominent community leader, is at the forefront of these efforts. She refuses to let Alicia's legacy fade. "We can't stop here," she says at a rally held in front of City Hall. "We need to make sure that Alicia's death wasn't in vain. We need to ensure that this town, and every town, has safeguards in place to prevent this from happening again." With pressure mounting, the City Council convenes a series of emergency meetings. Facing both the national attention and the local demand for action, they approve a set of reforms. Among them are requirements for de-escalation training, body cameras that cannot be tampered with or deactivated, and the formation of an independent review board to investigate any future allegations of misconduct. These measures are a hard-won victory for the community, but Linda and others know that real change will take time. The scars left by Alicia's death and the trial are still fresh, and many in Belhaven remain divided. But the movement has momentum, and for the first time, people feel that their voices are being heard. Jake's testimony during the trial was critical in securing Brian's conviction, and his plea deal reflects his cooperation. However, his reduced sentence does not sit well with everyone. Some in the community believe that he, too, should face the full consequences of his actions, arguing that he was complicit in Alicia's death and the subsequent cover-up. In the months following the trial, Jake's cooperation becomes a topic of heated debate. Some people argue that he made a choice to finally speak out, and while it may have been self-serving, it ultimately brought the truth to light. Others, particularly those who knew Alicia well, struggle to forgive him, seeing his actions as an attempt to save himself rather than a genuine effort to seek justice. Jake, now serving his sentence, writes a letter of apology addressed to Alicia's family and the community. In it, he admits to his role in her death and expresses regret for not standing up to Brian sooner. The letter is published in the local paper, and while some see it as a genuine attempt at redemption, others view it as too little, too late. Maria, who has followed the case closely even after its conclusion, visits Jake one final time in prison. "You had a choice, Jake," she tells him through the glass partition. "And you made it. But now you have a chance to do better when you get out." Jake nods, but his eyes are downcast. "I know. And I'll live with this for the rest of my life." In the months following the trial, Detective Maria Rodriguez and Linda Carter continue their work together. Maria has become a key ally in the push for police reform, advocating for changes from within the department. She knows that the culture of silence and cover-ups has to end, and she's committed to making sure Alicia's death sparks real, lasting change. Linda, meanwhile, channels her grief into activism. She partners with national civil rights organizations, using her platform to speak about Alicia's story and the broader fight for racial justice. She becomes a powerful voice for change, traveling beyond Belhaven to share her experiences and call for accountability in policing. Together, Maria and Linda form a bond forged by their shared determination. They organize community forums, advocate for transparency, and ensure that the new policies passed by the City Council are implemented effectively. They know that the fight is far from over, but they remain committed, honoring Alicia's memory through their work. Months after the trial, a mural of Alicia is painted on the side of a building in the town square. The mural depicts Alicia smiling, with her hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly, surrounded by vibrant colors that symbolize hope and resilience. It becomes a gathering place for the community, a space for both mourning and solidarity. Underneath the mural, a plaque reads, "In memory of Alicia Evans and the fight for justice. May her legacy inspire us to build a fairer, safer community for all." Linda visits the mural often, sometimes alone and sometimes with others who fought alongside her. She leaves flowers, photos, and handwritten notes from people whose lives were touched by Alicia's story. The mural becomes a symbol of the progress that has been made, as well as a reminder of the work that still needs to be done. Maria stands before the mural one evening, the setting sun casting long shadows across the painted image. She reflects on everything that has happened: the trial, the division within the department, and the small victories won by the community. She knows that justice is a long road, and while Alicia's case is closed, there are many others that still need attention. As she looks at Alicia's face, Maria feels a renewed sense of purpose. "This is only the beginning," she murmurs to herself. "There's more work to do." With the support of the community and allies like Linda, Maria commits herself to the ongoing battle for justice, determined to ensure that what happened to Alicia never happens again.